good.
Okay, well, that's not what you should be seeing. Provide a quick overview of the key issues in undertaking a machine translation project and provide some rough guidelines based on experience that I have had over the last 16 years. And Grigory is someone who is involved with looking at many, many different machine translation engines, and thus can also provide insight on how some may differ from others. And do you see a slide now that says, what is machine translation?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, machine translation is an automated human language translation done from one language to another. In the way, when we speak about it, we always talk about a source language and a target language. And this enables, a discussion around machine translation pairs of languages. There's always a pair, a source and a target, and the source and target can vary. It used to be very often always related to English, but now this is not true, and there are many hubs in terms of what languages really matter, and wherever high value content is concentrated, those languages tend to be the source languages most often. One view of machine translation is to see that as just a way to translate a single word or a sentence or maybe a single page. But there are many who say that mass machine translation is not just a simple translation of a cluster of words, but it's liberating knowledge from the constraints of language. And so, for example, the Wikipedia, if translated, the Wikipedia ranges in size by language. The English Wikipedia is the largest Wikipedia in the world today, and it's 3 times larger than the next largest one, which is German. And then as you go down, by the time you reach the 10th or the 20th one, the English Wikipedia is probably 1,000 times larger in terms of number of articles, in terms of number of words, in terms of overall content available. So machine translation is a useful technology to allow more information sharing. So when most of us think about machine translation, what do we see? We think of Google, Facebook, Microsoft, the big portals and the machine translation, free machine translation capabilities they offer. These systems are translating as much as, a couple of trillions of words a day for hundreds of millions of users. And it covers, the whole gamut of what human beings might want to translate. So it's a generic public resource. And in terms of the technology and what these big companies are doing, it's very expensive to do. It requires lots of computing power, and it requires very sophisticated teams to be able to manage and keep this in place. This is not possible for many companies that may want to use this. And so if you look at the languages that have tended to dominate, okay, so that just represents data that Google shared in 2016 about which languages tend to dominate in their machine translation. They don't always offer the latest data for this, but when they do, it tends to follow this, pattern here. You see that English is the dominant language, but Portuguese, Italian, Russian, and German and Arabic are also popular languages. This is a picture that's already 4 or 5 years old. I am sure that this picture has changed and other languages are emerging. Chinese is probably much more significant now. If we were to look at the whole web, not just Google's picture. So when we focus, so while these generic engines are what most people are using, they're not really useful for a lot of business and enterprise and government work, because there's data security issues, there's limitations on how these engines can be tuned for the specific subject matter that is of concern to an enterprise or a government agency. And so there has, along with the generic engine portals, the public portals, there has been an increase in the number of capabilities available for individual enterprises to build MT engines that focus on the subject matter that they most care about. So for example, there is a COVID crisis and you want to provide as much information as possible to a population about, all the affiliated diseases, the respiratory diseases, the kinds of symptoms that you might have, the treatment processes, the treatment, alternatives available when you don't have resources, as much content as possible, beyond wash your hands and wear a mask. If you want to provide thousands of pages or hundreds of thousands of pages of information, then machine translation can help you optimize and build a system that focuses just on that subject and raise and create a system that it has the possibility of being better performing than some of the public MT systems out there. And and this is why you'll find many big companies have their own MT engines that is trained with their own data and that enables them to optimize the technology around the language and the subject matter that they care about. So again, if we look at what machine translation is, it's a way to access knowledge and information resources that are concentrated in just a few languages. And it allows you to share them in many more languages. It improves communication and information sharing possibilities in any kind of global collaboration or business setting. So government, right down the center of the UNESCO mission, of education and community value resources. It is a technology that enables this to be done at scale. And it expedites any country and the possibility of any country being more digital and being more able to talk to the rest of the world and be ready, in terms of global digital readiness. So it's a technology that enables all of this. And why does this matter? Because when we look at the sheer volume of traffic that's happening on the web, you see that it's exploding and it's happening at a scale and exponential growth rate that has never been seen in the history of mankind. So I've seen people say things like the amount of information created in the last 2 years is greater than has been created in the history of man up to that point. So, the sheer volume of information that is being generated is really significant. And, these numbers give you some sense for it in gigabytes, and so gigabytes don't mean that much from one perspective, but it shows you the sheer volume of it. But when we look at the concentration of the economic value created by this and the access to the most valuable information in this, you see that it's very, very heavily concentrated with two countries, the United States and China. They dominate the geography of the digital economy. And you can see how even Europe is really a very marginal player in terms of who are the big players in the digital economy of the world today. You see that Russia and that American and Chinese companies are everywhere, and they have a huge digital footprint, and so tend to dominate much of the benefit that is generated from a digital economy. Now, this matters because there's so much information being created every day, and this chart just shows you, this is a chart that this company produces on an annual basis, so every minute of the day, there are 208,000 people participating in Zoom meetings. There's millions of text messages being, sent. there's 41 million, about 42 million messages being sent in WhatsApp. So this just gives you a sense of the scale. And if you look at it, from year to year, you'll see that the numbers move at an unbelievable rate. And so this content explosion is closely related to being present and having access to the digital economy and the digital opportunity, from the economy, the economic benefits that having access to lots of information, having access to digital business interactions, gives the individual, lots of economic benefit as well. So, this is why this matters. And here's another reason why machine translation really matters is that if this was an estimate done by a market research company in the US that focuses on the translation business. And they just basically said that if you were to only translate 0.01% of the world's daily content into the 100 most economically significant languages, so just ranking the countries by GNP and then seeing what languages you would need to translate into, you'd need around 2 billion translators. And that's just for 1 day's worth of content. And if you were to go beyond that, the number of translators needed would be even greater. So, what this really shows, I guess, is that there's too much content for human translators to do everything. And that if you do not use this kind of technology, your presence in the forward-moving digital momentum and economy is going to be marginalized. And so that it's in the interests of every nation and every major language to have some kind of machine translation presence, because it means that the people who speak that language have access to more information and can participate in the world in their own language. Otherwise you're forced to, one of the factors that we see happening today is that many languages are dying. They're dying because not enough people speak those languages, and there's not enough information in those languages. And so what this digitization of all this content is creating and driving is that more and more information is converging on a smaller and smaller subset of languages. And, so if a company, a population needs to be functional in those languages to be able to share in the educational content, the public health content, or even just, improved governance. And so, these are some of the reasons that many countries that have attempted to build more robust machine translation technology capabilities, these are some of the reasons they gave. There's better monitoring of understanding of public needs and concerns. While the elite populations all tend to speak English, the bulk of the local populations don't. And if you want to build public health and educational systems, so that a kid born in a village has the same access to becoming an engineer or becoming a participant in the AI economy, they need access to information. And so machine translation is a means to make this happen. And so, for many of us who've been involved with this technology, we see that, while there's a very clear business focus, and for companies like Google and Microsoft, machine translation probably generates hundreds of millions of dollars of ad revenue. The technology enables more people to participate in the digital world. And, this is an important thing, and especially is an important driver for building educational and knowledge-based industries. So when we look again to what does it take to build a machine translation system? If we believe and if we agree that machine translation technology and the availability of machine translation technology for your language is really important, what are the challenges to building better empty systems or building any empty system for your language. The most frequent problem that stalls the development of machine translation technology is the availability of linguistic data resources that enable this. Machine translation systems are built with data from historical translations. So as if you have lots of books, if you have lots of data, content, government documents that have, say, English to your language, then it's easier to build a machine translation system than if you don't have it. In the UNESCO forum, we have had some discussions with people in Ghana around the Akan language. And, while there was lots of enthusiasm about building an empty system, it has stalled because the issues around coordinating and making enough data of linguistic data available to make this happen has been found to be much more challenging than many people estimated. And so in addition to the data, you also need specialized computing resources, not just standard PCs. You need, what are called GPUs and TPUs. These are just specialized, more expensive computers. And you need people who understand the science of machine translation, and these are people with computational linguistics backgrounds or what is called natural language processing backgrounds. So if you look at people who work in artificial intelligence and machine learning, most of them have backgrounds in computational linguistics or natural language processing. So, while that is, that expertise is difficult to build in a country that is starved of other resources anyway, you can acquire, you can acquire consulting assistance to do that part, but getting the data is the most significant challenge. Another thing that people should understand is that all languages are not equal in MT, that some languages are easier to do. The more data you have, the easier a language is to do. The more research there is in a specific language, the more likely that language will have better machine translation. And the closer it is to the source language. So, if assuming that English is a very dominant source in the digital world, because so much knowledge is concentrated there, then we see, this is a ranking shared by the Microsoft MT team that shows which languages do best when you translate from English to the target language. And we see that, Italian, Chinese, French, Japanese, so these are all the largest economies in the world, and Danish is a language that's very close to English, so it tends to do well because there's enough data, and there's the reason that Chinese and Japanese and Hindi are showing up that high is because there's been lots of research in those languages. Portuguese is naturally close to Romance languages in general, tend to map more easily to English, and so you see the ones in green tend to be the most useful in terms of raw machine translation. When you just throw any Wikipedia article at it, or any news story, or a government document, a UNESCO government document, at the machine translation systems, the odds of it producing a reasonably useful translation that will at least give you a just understanding of it is best on these green circled languages, and it's worst on these red circle languages. And the red circle languages are harder because there's less data, there's more linguistic variance between the structure of the source language and the target language. And so the greater those variances, the tougher it is to build a high quality, machine translation system. So, so this is the reality you will also face, that, as you look at different languages, the problem is not going to be the same for every language. And when we understand that the more data you have, the better the possibility of getting an empty system, a good empty system. This chart shows you how that picture can vary. So for French, we have almost 4 trillion sentences. So that's assuming an average sentence has 10 words. Let's just make it easy to do the calculation. So you have 40 trillion words of French and English parallel data, whereas you have 500,000 words in Yoruba, 500,000 sentences in Yoruba. So you have much less data for most of the African languages and many of the Asian languages, except for Chinese and Japanese, maybe even. And so even those, relative to the European languages, they tend to be much lower in terms of freely available data that can be used to teach machine translation systems, how to do language translation. So, this process that we call training is essentially a teaching of the computer to find how to do translations in those languages. So this gives you a sense for the challenges for a lot of the UNESCO kinds of languages we would expect to see. So, this is why I have focused so much on the data acquisition aspects of machine translation, because without data, you tend to stall. Your project tends to get stuck. You don't really have the possibility of really moving forward. You need some minimal amount of data to really begin. And one possible way is to build collaboration between government agencies, schools, and other academic institutions. Start scanning and OCRing all the available books that have been fully translated. And so you build up a corpus of the source language and the target language, and to as large a volume as possible. And maybe you spend a year or two building this corpus up before you really start building engines. Or, it's possible to build engines along the way, but really to focus on the data acquisition aspects is the most likely path to success. In some cases, Google, Microsoft, Facebook might make data available. They're crawling the web, they're gathering all the data. They may not have enough to build a system, in some of the UNESCO languages, but they may have enough to get you from, to not start completely at zero. The more successful, countries in being able to engage the community and the schools in building up linguistic corpus, through a volunteer crowdsourcing kind of effort, the more likely it is you can start building up enough corpus to build empty systems for these what are called low resource languages. And then, again, focusing on a specific area rather than trying to build generic systems that do anything and everything. Say that, okay, let's focus on just science and technology education. Or let's just focus on public health around, child and infant care. And to build your corpus around, say, we have 10 million sentences in English. Can we build this up in Akan? Can we get, how much of this, how can we get the community to help us? So you could send to all the people that teach English in Akan in the country, in Ghana. You ask them you have schools participate in programs where they have kids translate these sentences, and these sentences are somehow gathered and collected and enable it to be used in these kinds of new next generation digital language initiatives. People are always crawling and gathering data from the web. If it exists, then it's possible, that you could do this. I have list of questions that one should ask before you begin, and I'm told that it's somewhat stern in its where you land sometimes. But basically, you want to make sure you have a clear content focus and a purpose for the empty system. And empty systems only because the complexity, because the effort needed to build them is significant. You should not be thinking about it unless you have regularly high volumes of content that you expect to be doing, on this. And do you have the data? And if you don't, can you build the teams? Can you build the community support and the collaboration to do it? If these things happen, then you move down the path. Otherwise, it's really not viable. And we find that for many, this is the case. So, once you've defined the purpose of the system and you have a data acquisition plan, and then you basically look at the source data that is the kind of data that you want to have a system be able to translate on an ongoing basis. Because, for example, COVID and, the child healthcare related stuff, the content is always evolving. There's always new content coming. So there's value in having the machine translation system because it enables you to translate all the new stuff, not just the old stuff. The old stuff is wonderful, but it allows you to translate emerging research and emerging breakthrough stuff that's coming through. So then you collect feedback on how good or how bad it is, and then you continue to refine and improve the model. And this is the process that most people are going to go through. And how do we know what is likely to succeed? When you have executive sponsorship that has a 3 to 5 year time horizon and understands that this is not something like, oh, let's get a team of NLP people, let's just throw whatever data we have in there, and in a month we have some kind of an empty system. It's possible that you can if you have the data, because it is very, very data dependent, but empty should be considered as a long-term, ongoing, continuous initiative. And that the longer the commitment, the more likely that you'll actually deliver value and success to the community that you're trying to do this for. Having a core team that stays in place, that is involved through the data acquisition and the system building and evaluation phases is very key to success. And you need less technical people during the data acquisition phase, because it's really more about building a system where people can contribute sentences of translation, or language teachers can just digitize their books and put them in there, or people can scan books and put the parallel sentences in there. Then when you get to the model building and management phase, you need more technical people for that phase. And again, focusing on what you're going to do. It's easier to boil a large pot of water than it is to boil the ocean. So a generic system is the equivalent of boiling the ocean. And doing something for child healthcare is the equivalent of boiling water for a large pot of water. And in terms of effort and resources required. So you have realistic expectations. A lot of early machine translation systems produce really trashy stuff. I mean, you can look at the Maori and some of the African languages on Google and you'll see they're pretty bad. I remember the initial Indian systems were terrible, the Indian language systems, because I speak 2 Indian languages. And they were terrible, but they have improved and they're now actually quite usable. So they're usable enough that I would actually attempt to read Indian newspapers that I wouldn't have in the past. And they're helpful enough for me to get the general sense. So, the development process involves collection, organization, and cleaning of training and evaluation data, a plan to build initial systems, assess how good they are, how bad they are, what areas need to be improved, how do we improve them, and then getting the user community involved in a way that their feedback becomes part of your next generation data and the evolutionary path that your MT systems go through. There's a lot of open source stuff out there. This is the most popular one for the neural machine translation systems that are being built today. It is complicated. It is not stuff that you can just walk up to and use. It's not like using PowerPoint or Microsoft Word or a browser. It requires specialized skills. And so you need that. But we need to understand that at the end of the day, language translation is not something that computers can completely do. There will always be some human involvement and human oversight, and you need to have translators always standing close by to translate the stuff that really matters well. So if there are instructions on what to do with a baby that has diarrhea and could die, those instructions should not be left to a machine alone. Humans have to be involved to make sure that they make sense. And in that specific example, you need humans who understand some of the medical implications, that if a baby has had these symptoms for these many days, you have to go to a hospital. You're beyond the point of any kind of self-care. And, so you need to know what kinds of information to bring humans in for. And humans will always drive and raise the quality of the machine translation. The feedback that informed humans bring to this will always be valuable and useful. I cover a lot of these subjects in more detail on a blog that I write, and you can find that there. But that was the presentation that we had, and it ran much longer than we had because of the problems we had. I apologize for that. But, so Grigory can help with many of the technical questions if you have about some of the specifics of the open source alternatives. He has put his hands on many of these, and he knows them better than most would. There are very few people that play with all of them. Most people tend to play with just one. Grigory is one of those rare people that plays with all of them. So he's a wealth of knowledge on what to do when you get to that point. But, it all begins with data and a clear plan. And if you don't have the data and the clear plan, knowing how to run 5 open source toolkits is really pretty pie in the sky kind of scenario.
Well, thank you very, very much. This has been very enlightening, and I think that it gave us a much better overview for the people on the call that don't have that amount of technological knowledge. So, are there any questions? I'm sure there is something that you would like to discuss. I can see people raising hands, but just go ahead and ask. Go ahead.
Right?
Yes, Siva, go.
Yeah. It's a wonderful lecture, because persons like me who are not trained in any of these translations and practically or even computational linguistics, my colleague Prabhakar Rao is of course more in that area. But what I find is, based on your presentation, certain kind of languages or certain languages which are small further will get marginalized in this process of physicalization, because there won't be much of translations feasible in those languages, because they lack resources, they also are poor. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted, what would be the way out if we want to, at least make those languages more vibrant in terms of information sharing and also, this translational studies. Thank you.
I'll say some very brief things, and maybe Grigory can add more about this. There are efforts underway right now in the research area on addressing what they call low resource languages. So, we know every day 5 more languages die because there's so few people that speak it. So, they're Native American languages, or they're remote parts of the Russian outer region, Siberia, where the population is so small that it's not possible to sustain the language. But there is research, like I know that Facebook and Google are attempting, knowing that there's not enough data for many of the languages of the world, and because you really only have the top 120 maybe that they've even attempted to do. But, so what do you do for the next 200 or the next 500 languages? They are trying to piece through and build systems that are still in a very primitive stage. And if you want to look into that, the two companies I know that are doing the most research in this are Google and Facebook. I know Grigory might have more comments on this. No?
Yeah, actually, that's a problem. And from the one side, there are a lot of movement in creating, in doing research in this field. But the most significant problem of this approach is that it's hard to use. There are articles and they're interesting, but it's long way from this article to easy to use tools to train models for low resource languages. So you have to have a strong team with NLP experience, with strong IT skills, because it's really hard to translate this research into ready to use tools. But I think in a few years, there will be definitely more tools to use. Anyway, it's a very good movement. And I hope some easy to use tools will emerge.
We have Hanem that has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sorry I can't switch on my camera. My internet is not great today. But I wanted to thank you, Kirti and Gregory, for this. And I'm sorry if I joined you late. I might have missed a little bit at the beginning. I'm interested in your chart when you listed Arabic as one of the green zone languages. It comes at number 11, given the sheer amount of data, as you mentioned. But I have been working on building parallel Cobra for some good time now, since 2017, especially on legal resources and legal texts between English and Arabic. And I find it easy to find information, find resources, but my only challenge, because I'm not a computational linguist myself, I have experienced it or experimented with corpus linguistics, is it's harder to build a parallel Cobra, really, actually, especially in Arabic, which I'm involved in. It took me some good resources and some good money to build 250,000 of words between English and Arabic. And I don't know if you know a lot about this language, but there is no one-to-one correspondence between a sentence in Arabic and a sentence in English. So this takes a lot of manual effort. So we built the corpus on Trados, but Trados have aligned the sentences like randomly, and we ended up not having a clean one-to-one corpus as such. So my question really, or a comment here, is I'm sure there are experts here in the audience. If you know of any easier way of building parallel Cobra in general, I'm aware that Sketch Engine have got some good Cobra in many languages, Arabic being one of them, but Arabic only has got the Arabic 1010, which is not parallel corpus. So really, it's a general question to all of you, if you happen to have any idea how to make this process easier, really. Thank you. I'm sorry, it's a long question.
Yeah, the tools for corpus management are very raw. There are no really friendly tools out there. Trados, in my opinion, and I used to work at SDL, is not a very good tool for doing corpus work. Once you have the data in properly aligned, it's fine to, keep it as a repository. But when you're working and you're playing with alignment and you're playing with how good is this match, you need different kinds of NLP tools. And I have seen many variations of these tools. There are none that are friendly. They all require some level of technical adventurousness, for you to want to play with them. I don't know, like Grigory is someone who delves in deeper on the technical side. I mean, there's an initiative called Paracore. You'll find some things around the European Commission. They have made a bunch of tools available, and Taos is another organization that has a listing of some of the public tools that are available, and they actually have a webinar, I think, coming in the next week or two, or maybe even tomorrow, that where they talk about bilingual corpus management tools. So when you're looking at 100,000 sentences or millions of sentences, you want to know, you can't look at them all at the same time. You want to know, like, you need statistical indicators that, is this a good match, or is this likely to be a good translation or not? You want some sort of probability ranking, and you want to be able to extract the ones that really, if you have 60 words on one side and 1 on the other side, the odds of that being correct are pretty close to 0. And so you need ways to filter through large amounts of data. And I should let Grigory speak because he has more experience with this.
Yeah, that's a hard question. But in last couple of years, some tools are emerged, and it's good movement. But again, these tools are hard to use if you don't have strong skills in IT. Anyway, there is interesting movements like Paracrawl. Kirti mentioned it's large crawling efforts to crawl all the web, including Wikipedia and other sources, news sites, and so on and so on. And several companies like Facebook and Google do perform automatic alignment and quality assessment of these alignments, and created some filtered parallel corpuses. And I think Arabic is in good position here because there are pretty much Arabic resources comparing to some lower first languages, and they have filtered data sets like CC metrics and some other data sets filtered and put on the web. And I think we'll probably add some links to such data sets in our machine translation guidelines because they could be useful for such things. But again, there are still no easy-to-use tools to perform these alignments. You have to program by yourself with Python or some other tools. There is a gap between some libraries or code available and the end users who want this.
Okay.
Again, I believe this gap will diminish in upcoming years, but it takes time.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you mind writing in the chat the name of the tool you just mentioned that Facebook is using, please?
Yeah, it's kind of library. It's called Laser. I put a link here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
A quick question: is Paracrawl the one that Promzit created? No. Okay. Sorry, both Kirti and Grigory are muted.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't think that's
Okay.
That's the Promzit tool. It's another one.
Okay, thank you. Also, I wanted to say that Sarah Petrolina has put something in the chat about participatory research for low resource language, and also the grassroots NLP community massacre. Maybe Sarah, you want to tell us about this quickly? Sarah, you're probably muted. Okay, that's fine. So the next person who has raised a hand is Prabhagar. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. Would you like to unmute and?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for inviting me, Janet. Although I am getting regularly your mails, I am for the first time participating in this meeting. Just I would like to inform a couple of things. As might be the speaker is aware of, that University of Hyderabad, India, is one of the nodal centers for developing machine translation systems for Indian languages. We have developed 7 machine translation systems. We have developed machine translation systems for 8 Indian languages, and they are almost up to 85% perfection is there, because it is easy to translate from one Indian language to another Indian language, because the grammatical structure and the cultural background of these languages are similar. But the problem arises only when we translate from English to Indian languages due to the different grammatical structures of these languages. I myself a linguist, so we are also working in that area for a long time. And now we are into developing speech systems for Indian languages. We have just started the process, and soon I hope that we will come up with these systems. And the second one is that I am somehow not comfortable with that term. All languages are highly resourced. Only there are languages, privileged languages and underprivileged languages in this world. Privileged languages are the languages that have languages of advanced economies, so-called advanced economies. Underprivileged languages are those languages that are developing and underdeveloped economies. So what happens is that normally the content is available. The content is in every language. For every language, the content is unique. The structure of the language is unique. There is no inferior and superior languages in this world. Only what we decide is that whether it is economically viable or not to translate or to build a machine translation system, as it was pointed out. And the second one is that whether there is a research about these languages, linguistic research is there about these languages. These two are the determinants for developing any machine translation system. And third point, the last one I would like to mention, that 2 years ago we have formed a consortium of underprivileged languages in India, and we are using machine translation, we are using computational tools to preserve information in these languages. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing. Maybe you can give us any links in the chat of, some of these projects and initiatives. It would be really nice for us to learn more about them.
Okay, I will share.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I want to just clarify that when I say low resource languages, I just mean that the amount of data and tools available around the language are fewer than others. So English dominates. Even the Chinese use English tools all the time, and so even and the Chinese is far from a low resource language, but it's the documentation and the tools available for the people that work on the data. And so most often when we say low resource, we just mean data. Like, do we have data to build any kind of NLP initiative? So it's not in any way, I'm of Indian origin myself. I was born in Zimbabwe, so I come from the third world as such. And I don't have the view that this is better than that.
But even the third world term itself again
Yeah, well, I know that, but this is what I grew up with. So, I use these terms, and I know they're bad terms now, and they're developing economies. So I came from developing economies, and I understand that the language has changed, but I'm an old man now, so I have not moved with the times as fast as I should have.
That's fine. I'm just joking. Don't take me seriously. It's the end of the day in the UK, so I'm trying to take some fun because I've been working hard all day.
Well, this has been a great presentation. Tex, yes, your turn.
So the data about the relevant the difference in volume of the different languages is interesting, but it's also a little bit of an unfair comparison in that although English, its knowledge spans many different types of disciplines, not every community needs. It would be great if every community had all of that information available, but I'm thinking that some communities don't really need, for example, language relevant to space travel. And I'm just wondering if there isn't some description for particular communities, whether, if they're agricultural, what the assemblage of language or the size of the corpus would be for that domain, or another community that is more about tools and mechanical and manufacturing would have a corpus devoted to it, what that sphere of knowledge would be, because it might make sense to describe for these communities the size of the corpus that they should gather or the relevant disciplines, rather than saying everything that could possibly be talked about should be somehow translated into that space, because some of it will not be useful. Not that they shouldn't have access to it or have it available, but in terms of targeting a corpus and setting goals, it might make a little bit more sense. And I could see that maybe there's some unfairness in attempting to do that, but at the same time, it might give more relevant goals. And so I'm just wondering if there's anything like that in the literature, or your thoughts on that.
I mean, that's why I started my presentation talking about generic versus domain-focused systems. To develop generic systems, why do you need to have space travel in the Yoruba language other than very general stuff, because there might not be that many people interested in that. But it would be useful to have, I think, if you want to build a community of engineers that understands aeronautics, or, just air travel. For a kid to understand, why does a plane made of metal, how is it possible that it rises into the sky? That goes against the law of gravity. And so you need to have some background information to understand that. And English-speaking kids have tons of resources that would explain that. And if you're speaking in, I don't know, in Gujarati or Yoruba or Zulu, there's not that much you're going to find on something like that. So it means that the opportunities for that kid who doesn't have access to that information, he's never really going to understand why did that plane lift off the ground, unless he reads English. And so the value of doing this, but again, it's always, you can't do everything. So where does it have the biggest impact? And so I think it generally tends to be around child welfare, child health care. If you provide good information for that, and rich and broad and deep, then people will find it, and they can understand how to keep children healthy. And if you can keep children healthy, they'll solve the problems of how to get to the aerospace data, and all the other stuff later. So I think, to start with the basics, like the basic STEM stuff, science, technology, engineering stuff, just a high school level. If you provide good foundations for that, then the other stuff will be solved by the kids themselves.
Yeah, yes, of course. I was looking more for numbers, but that's okay. We can. Yeah,
you can do corpus analysis. I mean, the numbers are not difficult to find. You can go to the Wikipedia and look at agriculture, and it'll show you how many articles there are. And that is an easier problem to solve than actually beginning.
All right. Thanks.
Any other questions, anyone, or any comments, anything to discuss? There you go. Prabhakar, please unmute yourself. You're still muted.
I think his hand was up from before.
No, I had lowered it. Okay.
Professor Kirti, how do you think that finally this machine translation on NLP, whether it will promote or protect the diversity of languages in the world, or it may further lead to extension of so-called low-resourced, in your terms, languages? How do you think? In future, of course, not now.
I don't have a crystal ball. I think there are people that understand there's a problem, that languages are dying. But if it's a language like Cherokee, or if it's a language like, it has a population of 10 or 100.
UNESCO, for example, UNESCO thinks that developing, using ICT, we can save, protect, and promote languages. But what globalization showed us, that it is, instead of promoting diversity, homogenization has been happened in this world. So like that, how do you think, as a computational linguist, in future really developing machine tools for natural languages will really help to protect the diversity of languages in the world, or it may further diminish the diversity?
Yeah, I mean, my observation has been that the digitization, the digital world, dominates around a very small subset of languages, and it marginalizes most languages. This is the reality. Is it possible to change it? It's possible if it will have to take people from those communities to provide some contribution, or somebody needs to create infrastructure, someone who is really truly has noble intention. I don't think that person exists today. Google and Facebook don't have noble intentions. They're ad revenue generating companies, and Google generates, I saw the other day, like $47 million a minute of advertising revenue. This is not a problem they care about. It has to come from a higher mindset that doesn't exist in the world today. Everyone's looking out for themselves. Everyone's trying to survive. But I think there are a few small, not empowered people that don't have resources that are trying, and if they create some small infrastructure, and say even if you just have 1,000 sentences in 1,000 languages, that will be something that in future, as the technology gets better, it'll be possible to extrapolate the rest. So even if you create a small seed that preserves the language. That is how I see it could happen. But I agree completely with you that, the globalization is leading to homogenization. That's what's happening.
Kirti, I'm sorry to go on a tangent, but I added to the chat a link for Kirti and Gregory and everyone. This was pointed out to me last week. It's a new machine translation system for Basque. It has other languages too. I have no idea. I've explored it. I've tested it a little bit, but it looks pretty good. Until now, the ones I had seen were very bad. This one is looking good. It's some initiative in the University of the Basque Country, plus other organizations. It's part of European initiatives. I don't know, take a look, because I haven't had a lot of time to test it, but this for Basque is working much better than other systems I've seen. You are probably aware of this initiative. I think it's part of a larger initiative.
No, so I know that there are a few languages. Oops.
Do you see the link?
Yeah, I see the link. I haven't clicked on it yet, but I will look at it after the meeting.
Yes, because I have no idea what they are using, but I know there is not a lot of corpus for Basque, and like I've done an okay job. So I don't know, it's worth digging into, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the key research initiatives in the technology is that how can we get as much as possible with as little data as possible? Because this is the reality for all these, for after the first 60 languages, that's the reality for all the other languages. So there's 1,000 languages that have not enough data, and there's maybe 100 that have enough data. And so it's an important problem to solve. And, this is a way to do something when you don't have a lot of data. And the other strategy that people are trying to follow is that how can we create the data to, equivalent parallel data by using the existing data that's already there and, somehow extrapolating from that. So these are all just NLP techniques that are being attempted. And India is doing lots of research on this. They have 22 main languages, but they have many more. And, so he said they have, I've worked with people at CDAC in Pune, and, they were attempting early on to try and do this. And, it was a struggle, and the data was the reason, even though there are several newspapers in India that have almost the exact same content in different languages. If someone were to make this data more available, like the EU does, that would enable, hopefully countries to realize and start doing more of this kind of work.
Also, just to be a bit more optimistic, I mean, data is a great problem, no doubt. But there is also some initiatives, I believe, to find workarounds with insert some rule-based algorithms to, it could be, we could go into hybrid systems, which hasn't been explored a lot in the last 10 years. But I think it would be a good way to go for this type of languages, where you will not work only on statistical or statistical methods, but also have plugins with, rule-based methods, translation memory, all the tricks that you can get. I mean, it's another way to solve a little bit the data problem, maybe.
Yes, no, I agree that there are critics of the machine learning technology, because the people in machine learning all just say, oh, if you have the right data, then we can solve any problem. And, and they all, like this GPT-3 thing, which only exists for English. It costs $12 million every time you train. Yeah. So who's going to be able to do things on that scale? First of all, to have that much data. But so the people that are criticizing that are saying that you need a combination of the symbolic models plus the data models. And you have to merge them together to address this.
I worked on machine translation for years, particularly in generation for logos, the old logos, when all the old companies, were doing, and I'm convinced that a hybrid system is the way to go particularly for any language that is not English, essentially, Spanish, So that's all. I just wanted to contribute that little link because I looked at it and it looks pretty good. I don't know how they are doing it, but it looks pretty good.
We have Julie with a raised hand.
Sure. Hi. Yes. Thank you. I wanted to comment on Prabhakar's question. I have heard people discuss this question of the pressure on the smaller languages to, that they disappear, given the globalization and what's going on. In terms of parents deciding what is in the best interest of their child. So if the parent decides that the local dominant language, rather I should just say the dominant language of their region is the thing they should emphasize for their child, and so the education and use it at home instead of the local regional dialect, then of course that generation of those children lose that regional dialect. But all of the efforts to digitize those regional smaller languages, the thought is that it will relieve the pressure on those parents to make that decision to abandon their native language. And so these efforts to digitize that happen at many different levels, starting small, maybe the first efforts allow that local dialect, to allow them to create teaching materials. But they're not doing machine translation yet, but at least they're making teaching materials for the schools. If they're interested and they have the ability to put effort and energy and money into that, then at least they could make teaching materials. Let's say, for example, machine translation is way down at the far end, I believe, of the functional, amazing result of digitizing a language. So I realize though that the time that it takes to get there is long. So do you think that it is a bit naive for us to think that these efforts in digitization are going to really reach the smallest languages, because it takes time, and the other pressure to abandon the local language is still there for a time. So I'm wondering if you think that is a little bit naive. And I also had a separate comment for Kirti and Grigori. I was just wondering what you think about in the future. In your presentation, you used English, of course, to show us a lot of data, and that's very useful. But I'm thinking about the future of, let's say, what if Hindi emerges as a great example of machine translation emerging for all the related languages that are related to Hindi? What if that, or in Indonesia, all the languages that are related to Indonesian, and maybe these could emerge as some of the big, more successful machine translation successes. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm aware of Chinese being a new hub language. And there are several Chinese companies that are, like Baidu is the one that most people identify, but there's 3 or 4 initiatives around Chinese where Chinese is the equivalent of English in the perspective that they do. So they map every language relative to Chinese. And so they've created many, like Chinese German, Chinese Japanese, Chinese Portuguese, to drive the economic business imperatives. China is a major exporter, and I think the same thing could happen with India, because as power and as costs change in the region in Asia, India and other countries become more interesting as major manufacturing sites. And so Hindi is a language that has had a lot of interest and research being done in India, and even from the West, like Google and Facebook and all these guys all look at Hindi as a major proxy for India, because it maps to many of the, if you get Hindi right, then the other languages are a little bit easier, all the other Indian languages, because structurally they're similar. But yeah, I think that's what's happening now. It's already clear with Chinese. It used to be all English. Now I know in Grigori might know, if Yandex is doing lots of Russian-centric stuff, where they go from Russian to all the languages that really matter to the Russians. And there may be 20 languages that just go Russian to this, Russian to that. The Chinese are doing like 60 languages regularly now. Several Chinese initiatives, NLP guys, open source available already that you can find. Hopefully that happens for other parts, for Africa too. Swahili could become an African hub.
Yeah, I agree with Kirti. There is some movement in this direction. But generally, this highlights the main NLP problem, that almost all the useful models were just English models, and all other languages were beside these activities. And right now we have more tools for other languages. For example, GPT-3 is now not only English-based model, but there are Russian version of GPT, there are Chinese version of GPT. But again, it's still limited by a few languages, because it takes a lot of financial efforts and engineering efforts to build such tools. But anyway, we'll see more languages, more hub languages, more efforts centered around these non-English languages. And I hope this will help with more regional languages related to these particular hub languages. That's good movement. NLP becomes not strictly English related field, but at least there are some other useful models for other languages. I like it.
Grigori, to go back to Kutz's point about the hybrid, models,
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit for the rest of the audience here about hybrid models?
Yeah, I agree. That's the valid point, because current machine learning and artificial intelligence in general is mostly resource-heavy activities. It assumes you have a lot of data, and having a lot of data, you're trying to solve different problems. That's the main disadvantage of this current approach, because for many cases you don't have a lot of data, and you have to build some hybrid solutions. For example, trying to build hybrid system with the machine learning part and say rule-based part working together. Or there is a movement in machine learning field as well that called zero-shot learning or one-shot learning. Again, there is a movement to try to build systems that learn like people, on not huge amount, but on a few examples. But again, it's still research. It's field is still in infancy. So right now, the most fruitful approach, it's to build some kind of hybrids, statistical based approach, rule based approach, direct programming, and machine learning where it is possible to use.
Thank you. And also, Siva, you have your hand up if you want to unmute.
Yeah, I think what Julie mentioned, as well as Vakarao and others mentioned, it's a political question. So choosing a language, because what English is doing to all the other languages, in each country, the dominant languages do the same thing to the smaller languages. So therefore, what happens is, for example, in India, you have Hindi is one language in the south, in the north, whereas south you have 5 languages, which in fact 5 or 6, because I'm talking about the dominant languages. So what a dominant language does is more important, because dominant languages try to suppress or eliminate the smaller ones, because the preference of, as Julie mentioned, the preference of a parent is to get educated in the dominant language, because that provides them a job. So it becomes a survival and political question. So in that kind of and also economical, because the resources will not be available for smaller languages. This is what I've been doing, and then that's exactly what, in fact, Professor Kirti has mentioned, that only people like Google and others will not be interested in doing it, because there's no money in it. So only some people who have greater interest in the existence or survival of those languages will have to chip in, and that is a question of this thing. It's only few people who may be able to do it, but that efforts to save so many languages may not be feasible, though we try to preserve them as specimens in the museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Siva. Yes, please go ahead.
Is the information of Grigory that Russian IFAP, Information for All program, is doing a great job for protecting multilingualism in Russia. Every year they conduct international conferences, bringing scholars from all over the world in Hanchi-Manchsk and in Yakutsk. So they are doing very good job. I think you can be, because I regularly participate in those conferences. I myself speak Russian, so I have studied in Russia. So I myself speak Russian, so I regularly participate. They are doing good job.
Thank you. I agree. We have a lot of good conferences. Yeah, but we need more.
Well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much, Kirti and Grigory, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you everyone for contributing into this wonderful conversation that we're just touching upon issues. And of course, it would be great to have solutions, but we're working towards them. So next meeting is March 18th, and I will be sending an email with who is presenting. But in the meantime, if any of you wishes to present something, it's usually a 20 to 25-minute presentation. Please pass it on to colleagues. We want to hear from a diverse range of topics here, all to do with the digitization, the endangerment of languages, the revitalization, what it means, to the cultures, to the people, and whether it's linguistic or technology, we want to see what the communities do and what we can do to help the communities, move to the next level. So if nobody has anything else to say.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you to the speakers.
Thank you.
Good night to all.
Thank you.
Good morning for you and good night to us.
Good night, and namaste, and good morning.
Thank you.
Will we have the slides? Will the slides be posted?
Yes, we will post both the slides and the the recording.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks a lot.
I must thank Mr. Professor Kirti and team, because they have wonderful presentation, very lucid.
Yeah.
And
it was great.
I'm an anthropologist, but I could follow thoroughly what he's mentioned. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
job.
Bye. 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 Спокойной ночи,
Dhanyavad.
Григорий.
Спокойной ночи. Спасибо.